I mentioned last night we're going to be looking this morning at that peculiar relationship between a husband and a wife. I think most of us in the room are probably married. Some of us may be anticipating marriage. Some of us may be sworn to celibacy, and I appreciate that. Maybe this will be pertinent for, regardless, though, of your marital status. Anything in God's Word is good for correction and edification and so on. And so with that in mind, hopefully this will be useful. But I'd like to begin by reading a text in the Old Testament which concerns one of the most remarkable women that we ever hear of in the Scriptures. This is in 1 Samuel chapter 25. 1 Samuel chapter 25. Her name is Abigail. I'm going to move this over a little bit. Cecil, I'm going without notes this time, so cue cards in the back there. If you know the story, you know that this is in the time in the life of King David before he was king, when he was on the lam running from King Saul, who was out to get him. And during those years, he was wandering in a kind of fugitive status. And he had with him some men of valor who were really with him throughout his career, several hundred of them. And they were basically living off the land. That was the concept. And God continued to protect him. Some of the best psalms, of course, that David wrote came from that period of time. But this particular incident took place when David had, in an unsolicited way, which was something he would do, gone and protected the flocks of one of the landowners in that region, a guy by the name of Nabal. And David was hoping that even though he had volunteered his services, Nabal would reciprocate, and provide some sustenance for his men. And so when he had provided that service and had gone seeking some compensation for his efforts, Nabal had repudiated that and rebuffed him. And David had been caught in a moment of anger and was about to do something that, of course, he would have long regretted. He told all of his men to arm themselves, and they were just going to go and, in a typical ancient Near Eastern fashion, just in a kind of marauding campaign, wipe out Nabal, because he had insulted David on top of not providing anything in exchange for David's volunteered service as well. Nabal was married to a lovely and gracious and beautiful woman named Abigail. And Abigail learned of what had happened and immediately deduced what David was going to be doing. And so she put together a lavish provision for him, baked bread and so on, and then went out to meet David even as he was approaching. And the text that I'd like to start with, that's the setting for it. This is in 1 Samuel 25, and we will start at verse 23, which is picking up the story where Abigail first encounters David. And so starting at verse 23. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "My lord, let the blame be on me alone. Please let your servant speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. May my lord pay no attention to that wicked man, Nabal. He is just like his name. His name is fool." That's what the Hebrew word means. "And folly goes with him. But as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my master sent. Now since the Lord has kept you, my master, from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, as surely as the Lord lives and as you live, may your enemies and all who intend to harm my master be like Nabal. And let this gift, which your servant has brought to my master, be given to the men who follow you. Please forgive your servant's offense, for the Lord will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my master, because he fights the Lord's battles. Let no wrongdoing be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my master will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies will he hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. When the Lord has done for my master every good thing he promised concerning him, and has appointed him leader over Israel, my master will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed, or having avenged himself. And when the Lord has brought my master success, remember your servant. That remarkable speech from a remarkable woman prevented David from committing a ghastly crime that would have haunted him and changed the whole direction of his career. It's the power of a good woman, that we see coming to light there. So let's just pray and then we'll think about these things. Father, we're grateful that you have provided for us the opportunity to reflect on the Scriptures. We pray that the same Spirit that guided those pens of old that put these words on paper would be present among us this morning to give us an insight into it. And as a result of that we would be more faithfully and deeply inclined to honor and worship and serve you, giving you thanks in the name of Christ. Amen. If you know Abigail's story, you know that she was married. I don't know how it came to be that she was married to this guy Nabal, but she was very much aware of his character. And in some ways what she was doing at this point was performing the perfect duty of a perfect wife. She was providing for his welfare even though he very little deserved it, But in this interesting play between these two, she was also providing for David's welfare. As it turns out, if you know the rest of the story, you know that she gave this offering to David. David gratefully received it and acknowledged that she had prevented him from committing a crime, and he was very grateful for that, and then sent her on her way. She went back, informed her husband that she had just saved his neck, And the text indicates that Nabal had some sort of attack at that point. We don't know whether it was a heart attack, a stroke, or something else, but he sort of was just paralyzed and died only a few days later. And so the judgment that David would have tried to, effect against Nabal, God himself did, fulfilling the principle, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. That, of course, left Abigail a widow, and it was only shortly after that in fact, she became David's wife. So this woman who had been married to one of the worst men in history then found herself married to one of the best men in history. But in both cases, she played this remarkable role of being this godly woman who was used by God in such a remarkable way. Well, I want to keep that text in mind, but I'd like to have you jump over with me now to the New Testament, to the book of Ephesians. And the text that probably in all the Bible represents the most telling and lofty analysis of the marriage relationship. And so this is a familiar text. I'm sure you've probably read it, heard it read many times, but one more time through, thinking about Abigail here just a little bit may be useful to us. So we're in Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5, and we'll start at verse 21, where Paul says, not so much addressing himself to husbands and wives, but more to the whole community of faith, So all of us who are together as Christian people in any sort of relationship, either in the church or in any other setting, have this fundamental idea laid upon us as a principle by which we should be related to each other. Verse 21, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. So there is in the life of faith a basic principle of submitting, putting ourselves under each other. All of us, in a sense, are in a position of being servants to one another, irrespective of whether we may be in a position of authority. So if you happen to be a boss and somebody happens to be working for you, there is a sense in which even the boss is the servant of the person that works for him or her. You know, in the family it's the same way. The husband may be the head of the home, but he's still the servant to his family. I've thought of that many times in teaching. I have students that come into the classroom, and in some ways, I'm the boss. You know, I tell them what the homework's going to be, and I dictate the terms, and yet all that I'm doing at that point is really serving them. I'm the employee, you know, and I'm providing a service. The service may entail disciplining them. It may entail all kinds of things that they might not even like that much, but at the same time, the fundamental drive and principle behind what I'm doing is to be, you know, someone who's going to offer them this product. And that's really true in all of our relationships. Christ warns us against the misguided Gentile idea that people lord it over each other in their positions of authority. And he says it will not be that way among you. But the one that would be great among you, let him be the servant of all, you know. So this idea, of course, begins with Jesus, and Paul is simply articulating it. And then that principle he now carries into the home. And verse 22 picks that up. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. So Paul's first instruction here is to the wife, and the instruction is that she should submit to her husband. Now we think of that, of course, in terms of a kind of authoritarian sort of way, and there's certainly maybe something of that there, but that's not the principal thrust of that word, the Greek word hupotasso. It has a slightly different slant to it that would be very difficult to bring over into English in the way that it really quite communicates as it should. The sense of the word is that what Paul is saying to a wife is not simply submit in the sense of a kind of subjugation to authority, but rather submit in the sense of place yourself and your resources at the ready disposal of your husband. In a sense, submit to your husband all that you have to give him. Don't hold back. A woman is a wonderful complex of talents, of insights, of abilities, of all kinds of things of which most men are completely impoverished, you know. There's a reason we have a saying in our culture, women's intuition. You know, there's always truth at the heart of those little phrases because women are intuitive. There's a reason we have these jokes about women being able to multitask, whereas guys, think like dominoes. Don't get me off there, just right down the path, one thing after another. There's reasons for that. There are differences by God's wonderful design which distinguish the fundamental way a woman operates from the way a man operates. And those are all wonderful resources that make a man better. They sort of fill in all the gaps, of our male deficiencies. We are, just to be candid, basically a little retarded as guys. We're a little slow on the draw. Now, that's not bad. The fact that men are a little slower actually is part of the reason God put them in the position of leadership. Leadership should be stable. And guys can be stable, just like a slug. Very stable. Almost immovable, Women are fast. And they tend to get to conclusions much more rapidly than men, but in some ways it's good to have that kind of stabilizing influence at the top. A little bit of inertia there. Keeps things from going off kilter too quickly. But men so desperately need the resources of the woman in their life to supplement those points where there are those gaping holes in what's otherwise would be the male makeup. Now that doesn't mean if you're a single guy that you're hopeless, anything like that. But it's just saying that God in His wonderful engineering of the human society has made a wonderful fit between a man and a woman so that she fills in what's missing, in a sense, in the makeup of his person, so that, in a sense, they do become one flesh. Not two people, but sort of in this complementary relationship, joined together in something better than either of them could have been on their own. And the woman has all of these wonderful gifts to give, a kind of vast collection of resources, a sort of treasure chest, as it were, of good things, good gifts. And what Paul is saying to her is, don't hold out. Don't keep back that which you have to offer, but give it to your husband. He needs it. Women, submit to your husband, meaning surrender all of this that is yours to him so that he can be a better person. There's an old saying, behind every great man is a great woman. Well, there's truth to that. Part of what makes him great is the fact that she has offered that. The other side of this, of course, is that a wife has an amazing capacity to impoverish her husband. Just as she can make him great, she can destroy him. There's a great line in some of you have seen the movie, My Big Fat Wedding, or whatever it was. You remember that? What was it? Greek Wedding, yeah. The husband's the head of the home, but the wife is the neck, because she turns any way you want. You know that line? Well, there's truth to that. I'd heard that before I saw it in that movie, but there is truth to that. She has an amazing ability, amazing power. And what Paul is saying here is that she should willingly submit that, to her husband's, for her husband's benefit. Now, having said that, Paul then turns his attention to the husband, which of course is more our immediate concern here, and his instruction to husbands begins at verse 25. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Now, the first thing I want you to note here, and I hope these words are unnecessary in this group, but I'm just going to mention it because it seems to me in my life, if 43 is our benchmark, I'm well into the geriatric part of our group here. But I've met men who get all pumped up with the idea that they're the head of the family. And they think that Paul's command here is, men, make your wives submit. And they love to quote this verse and, get all over their wife's case because they think she's not submitting. That is a very poor tactic, and it doesn't work well. And it's also disobedient to God, because God has never commanded husbands to make sure your wives are submitting. That is not the command Paul gives. The command Paul gives to the husband is to love your wife. He commands the wife to submit, but that's her problem, not yours. Your task is to love your wife. And then Paul puts this amazing descriptive context on it, as Christ loved the church. Sometimes you'll hear people talk about Paul being down on women and so on. And, those are the most unbelievable distortions you could imagine. If you read ancient literature, and the most enlightened spirits of the ancient world, you won't find anything that is even approaching the dignity that Paul assigns to the woman. He is light years ahead of his culture, and really light years ahead of ours, in the worth that he attaches to the female of the species. I mean, you won't find anything like this in Aristotle or Plato or the Greek the Roman philosopher Seneca has nothing approaching this. Even the most progressive of them don't even get close to this standard. But what Paul is saying is, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Now, the way that Christ loved the church, as you know, is he loved us originally in spite of us. That's what the word here, the Greek word agape, is what I sometimes call cold-blooded love. Phileo, that word in the New Testament, means warm-blooded. It's relational. It's reciprocal. And in marriage, there should be a whole lot of that kind of love, where there's a sort of wonderful, warm community of interest, a mutual enjoyment of one another. But the problem with that is sometimes that kind of, waxes and wanes. We don't always feel that kind of love, and really that phileo love is more a feeling love. The agape love that Paul is referring to here is best described by how Christ loved the church. And the way that Christ loved the church originally was when the church was not appreciating it. We all started, Paul says, in Romans chapter 5, as enemies, while we were hostile to God. He loved us. While we were fighting him, fugitives, wicked, sinful, trying to escape, that's when he loved. There was nothing attractive about us. We weren't saying, hey, Jesus, come on in. We were saying, get out of my life. He came to us as a conqueror, and the weapons were the weapons of grace. So he infiltrated enemy territory originally to love it. That's how Christ loved the church, you see. It was a conquest of that which was hostile to him. Now, it's not to say that your wife is hostile to you. What it is saying, however, is that's the kind of love a husband is commanded to give his wife. A wife is to be loved, in a sense, in spite of her. Now, again, most of us have wives that we love to love, But what I'm saying is that your love for her should not be conditioned on her loveliness. But there's a sense in which it should be that which is drawn out of the resources of the well of God's grace within you, and it's independent of, how she may be at any given moment. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Not love your wife as you love your, buddies that you like to go bowling with, or, it's not that kind of love. It's something deeper than that, something more powerful than that. So Paul says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, and Christ's love for the church was this kind of winning conquest by grace. And then he goes on and says, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the Word. Now, this is first of all a description of what Christ does toward us. He is winning you over. In terms of Christian jargon, this is sometimes called sanctification. But the basic idea is that Christ he has sent in the troops to win you to himself. That's true of every Christian believer. He is gaining territory in your life day by day. He's getting rid of inconsistent affections that tend to go off in the direction of idolatry, because we all have a little bit of idolater within us. We all have a little bit, and actually quite a bit, within us that wanders off away from Christ. And he's winning us a little inch at a time, slowly gaining ground. And the tools, as it were, that he's using to accomplish that are the tools of the washing of water and the Word. Now, most commentators think that term washing of water is sort of a broad, generic way of referring to what you might otherwise call touch, or what's traditionally called in the life of the church sacrament, or you might call it ordinances. But it's those aspects of the worship that takes place in the community in which, in a sense, we are touched by God through Christ. We're baptized. That's a touch. We take the Lord's Supper. That's a touch. You see, the water stands for something that God does within us, touching us in a sense, changing us. At the same time, there's the Word. That's what's proclaimed. That's more the cerebral aspect of the Christian ministry within the church. And as we go to church, both take place. God touches us and speaks to us. Barry gets up and preaches one of his typically brilliant messages, and through that message, it's the voice of God speaking words of love to you. They may be words of rebuke, but rebuke can be loving, as you well know. And he administers the sacrament to you, and God through that touches you see. Word and touch. And over time, over years, slowly, gradually, God gains new beachheads in your person, winning what once belonged to the world and making it now the possession of Christ. He's washing you. That is what a husband does to his wife. In other words, Paul's analogy here is as Christ is winning us over, so a husband is loving his wife by word and touch. He is saying to her words of love, and he is touching her in the loving contact of that human relationship that we call marriage. Now that, of course, has a very narrow sense. Words of love, I love you. Touch, in its deepest sense, the sexual touch. But, of course, it has a much broader setting as well. The words that a husband says, regardless of the subject matter, in some ways are intended to win her over, to give her confidence. The touch is not only the touch of loving contact, but it's the honey-do list, you know. It's going out and providing for your family. I mean, touch is all of that broad, practical expression of your love for her, which has to do with what you do, and word has to do with all of those things that you say, but all of them are intended in some broad sense to win her, to sanctify her to you, just as Christ is sanctifying the church to himself. You are winning enemy territory in your wife, just as Christ is winning over enemy territory in all of us. Because you see, your wife, even though she's a wonderful bundle of things, a wonderful bundle of affections, they even today don't all belong to you. And there's not, all she can do is put them out there. That's all Paul can tell her to do. Submit these things to your husband, but it's still up to you to win them. A lot of husbands don't do this very well, don't get this idea. You don't hear this term too much anymore, but the term you used to hear about in terms of this was courtship. Courtship, you know. And a man would court a woman. You have no idea the number of astonished mothers in the history of our race who have looked at a young son transformed as he's about to go out on his first date. She doesn't recognize him because he's turned into something that she's never seen. He's dressed nicely, his hair's combed, he's got his deodorant on, he's wearing a nice shirt. She goes, what'd you do with my son, you know? But the reason is because he's going out to court someone. And over the months, as he begins to become more and more affectionately tied to this young lady, he sends her flowers, he sends her candy, he gives her little cards, he does all kinds of things, spends an immense amount of money on her, just knocks himself out trying to win her affection. Yeah? Any of you been there? And you know, after he's done this for a while, he thinks, boy, hopefully I've gotten the job done. So he, you know, kind of works up the courage to, as we say, pop the question. Will you marry me? And, you know, then she responds, however she responds. Now, this is a critical moment in the life of this relationship because these two These two are almost speaking a different language. He's asking one question, and she's hearing a totally different question at this point. The question he's asking at that moment is, have I won? You know? I have been knocking myself out for months. I mean, this has been a hemorrhage of money and time and effort, and now I want to know, have I gotten the job done? Have I moved enough freight to have you say, I do? You know. So he's asking, you know, did I win the battle here? She hears the question this way, honey, this is only the beginning. What I've done for you so far is nothing. I want to spend the rest of my life lavishing upon you the expressions of love that you've only seen the bare beginnings of in this little period of courtship. So what he thinks is, you know, what she thinks is just beginning, he thinks is just winding down, you know. And there's your problem. So the two people get married, and both of them are in for a disappointment, because she wonders, what happened to that guy that used to be, you know, dating me? And he wonders, doesn't she realize, you know, she said yes? And now you have this kind of awkward misunderstanding. And I have to say, if Paul had to vote for one or the other of these two, he'd vote for the wife every day of the week. Because Christ doesn't just love us up to the point that we say yes. That's only the beginning. Christ's love for the church is a relentless pursuit of everything in you, in the determined effort to make it His alone. He is determined to win every square inch of territory in your person and get it to the point that it is a sacrifice to Him. And unfortunately, most of us guys have fallen infinitely short of that. But that's what Paul is calling us to. Husbands, love your wives, pursuing her, courting her, chasing down every stray affection in her and winning it to yourself by your loving word and loving touch. Make her your own. And it's true, it only begins at the wedding ceremony. That's only the first little piece of the journey. The great, wonderful adventure of marriage is to be this remarkable reflection of what Christ is doing to us. A husband constantly winning over to himself, you know, sanctifying, as it were, to himself, his wife. So that leads Paul then to this next observation, verse 27, and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. Isn't that an interesting expression? To present her to himself. Christ wants to give himself a gift. That's the language here. I don't know if you ever give yourself a gift. We obviously think of giving others gifts, but it's okay sometimes to give yourself a gift. You know, a day off, rafting down the river, whatever it might be, going to a men's retreat, kind of a gift to yourself. It's okay, that's fine. Jesus wants to give himself a gift, and you're the gift. The problem is the gift keeps fighting, you know. And so, in order for Christ to give himself the gift, he has to keep wooing you like a lover. I mean, the overtones in the Scriptures are very graphic. We are viewed as this bride. Vis-a-vis Christ, we're all female. We all, you see, are the ones who are being won by Christ. The bride of Christ is the language. Because he wants to give himself a fully, holy, devoted present that loves him and him alone. And this whole process of Christian growth is gradually loving Christ more than anything else. None of us in this room loves Christ right. We all have so far to go. But fortunately, Christ is helping us get there, We could never do it on our own. It's a gracious process. But Paul's analogy here is that a husband should give himself a gift. And the gift he gives himself is his wife. To present her to himself is the idea. So part of what you're doing when you love your wife, when you express to her in word and in deed your devotion to her, giving to her the same kind of love that Christ gives to the church, she is inclined to surrender. She's commanded to surrender, but you see, she needs help. She's told, don't fight, submit, but at the same time, there is that role that we play of winning her over. And as she submits into that, and as a loving husband extends that to her, he can present her to himself. Now, Paul has, again, this is a deeply sexual idea. Paul's idea of presenting her to himself has at its core a kind of sexual notion, but it's vastly broader than that. It's not less than that, but much more than that. There's a sense in which she is presented to him in every aspect of which the whole complex of resources that she is, all of the wonderful talents and skills that she has, all of the great insight that she has that you don't, all of these become, in a sense, your resource, making you a better person. So you present her to yourself, and Paul says something holy, something pure, meaning here something that has been, in a sense, freed from conflicting affections. Then Paul goes to sort of another level when he says in verse 28, in this same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. You see the progression. Christ wins us over, and the biblical metaphor is we are his body, the body of Christ. Paul develops that elsewhere. The husband loves his wife and wins her over, and in a sense she becomes his body. So that now to love your wife is to love yourself. To do something nice for your wife is to do something nice for yourself. You're acting in your deepest self-interest to do something lovely for your wife. You are acting in your own best interest to love her, because as you presented her to yourself, she has become one flesh with you, and it becomes indistinguishable. You care for your own body, and to care for her, body and soul, is the same thing as caring for yourself. It's that intimate. And it is an amazing thing, isn't it? I mean, every married man knows there's something profoundly mysterious about this union that takes place. I mean, I've been married now for just about 25 years. And I have to say, and I think every married person knows this, you get to the point where I know what she's thinking. She knows what I'm thinking. And you would think, well, that would make a highly boring relationship, but in some ways it's not. It's that sense in which we, in our combined personality and giftedness, can bring to any situation so much more than either one of us could do singly. To love your wife is to love yourself, And so Paul says, a man ought to love his wife as his own body. He who loves, this is a most amazing statement, he who loves his wife loves himself. So love her for your own sake. After all, Paul says, no one ever hated his own body, but he feeds and cares for it, just as Christ does the church. His point being that if we do this for ourselves, then how much more should we do this for this person who is one flesh with us? For this reason, verse 31, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery he says. But I'm talking about Christ and the church. And then finally the statement, however, each one of you must also love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. So Paul's final comment here in this text, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. In so doing, you constantly win her so you can present her to yourself and love her as if she were your own, making her, in all of her resources, your resources, making her talents your talents, making her insights your insights, and all of that, you see, being a great tribute to Christ and his love for us. At the same time, she's told to respect her husband. It is an interesting, Paul's insight here, I think, is astonishing. For an unmarried man, he really got it, Women thrive on the love of their husbands. That is what makes them bloom like a flower. And even the tiniest little expression of spontaneous love toward her, the little unexpected, expression of your devotion to her, does something in her so profound you could hardly measure it. It doesn't take much, it just takes, and it's not like wait around for your anniversary, it's those things that happen just kind of unexpectedly that say, I really do love you. Husbands, love your wives. She is told to respect her husband. Men need respect more than they need love. A woman who disparages her husband guts him and can rob him of his sense of worth more rapidly than virtually anything in life. He can be losing in business, struggling here, struggling there. If he has a wife who respects him, he's still a man. That has more to do with his sense of well-being than any other single thing. And that respect that she gives, that admiration, men thrive on being admired by that woman. Just in the same way she thrives on being loved by her husband. And Paul's emphasis there is just right, that both of those are there. Well, Abigail was a wonderful example of that. Even when she was married to a character like Nabal, she was nevertheless a gracious woman who was acting in his best interest. And when God took him out of the way, she continued to be a gracious woman who was acting now in the best interest of her husband David. There's a powerful parallel. I'm going to resist the temptation to call it an allegory. I don't want to suggest that, but it's certainly a powerful parallel of our experience with Christ. We were once married to a tyranny of guilt and a kind of destructive presence in our lives that was beating us down, and God took it out of the way so we could be married to a greater David, Christ himself. And he's winning us, in a sense, as David did Abigail. But each of us can be, in a sense, our own David to our own Abigail in loving our wives. So anyway, hopefully that's useful for us as we think about our marriage and our relationships with our wives.